Welcome. My name is Peter Strong. I'm a professional licensed psychotherapist specializing in mindfulness therapy. This is a system of psychotherapy that works very well via Skype and is extremely effective for the treatment of agoraphobia. People suffering from agoraphobia find it very important to work online because it's so difficult to leave the comfort of your home or secure place. This is the biggest feature of agoraphobia, this fear of having a panic attack if you leave a secure comfort zone. And it can become progressively worse over time. Many people I've worked with have had agoraphobia for sometimes as much as 10 years. It's very debilitating, and it limits just about every aspect of a person's life. So it's very important to seek treatment. Mindfulness therapy is a very good way of working with anxiety in general. It helps you change the underlying patterns of habitual, conditioned reactions that feed and sustain your anxiety and panic attacks. So panic attacks are simply a very acute form of anxiety. It's like a storm, an anxiety storm. The best strategy, the best approach to overcoming agoraphobia is a very systematic system of exposure therapy, but not classical exposure therapy, which is based on the idea of becoming familiar and habituated through repeated exposure to the stressful situation or area or other triggers. That can work, but often it's very inefficient because it simply re-traumatizes you. It simply feeds that anxiety. So what I have developed is called mindfulness-based exposure therapy. And this is a different approach, really. It certainly will involve exposure challenges, a systematic approach where you will set yourself goals each day and carry those out. But the key ingredient with mindfulness-based exposure therapy is the preparation and training before and after each challenge. That is what is vital, and I feel is often missing in traditional, conventional exposure therapy. So, what do we do in mindfulness-based exposure therapy for agoraphobia? Well, you set up a series of challenges. You then do what we call a rehearsal meditation before you do your first challenge. This is where you will play through that challenge in your imagination and specifically look for those triggers and the anxiety reaction that gets triggered. When you find the anxiety, you then work with that and train with that anxiety using mindfulness. You build a relationship with that anxiety that's based on openness and friendliness. These are the two vital requirements for healing anxiety. Very often people fall into reactive patterns of avoidance and self-criticism or hatred towards that anxiety, and that will not help the healing process. In fact, avoidance and aversion are the two main factors that feed the underlying fear. So we build a different kind of relationship based on consciousness and compassion for the emotion itself. We learn to see the emotion as being an object in our awareness. We start to break the habit of reactive identification, where we become completely consumed by that anxiety, where we take on the identity of our emotions. Instead, we learn to develop a conscious, observing relationship where we observe our emotions, but we don't become them. This process is very, very important, because if you identify with your anxiety, then you end up feeding it. It's another reactive process, like avoidance and aversion, that simply feeds the fire of anxiety. So we train with it. We train to sit with our anxiety during meditation, during rehearsal meditation. We learn to not identify with it. We learn to see it as a separate object. And then we start to explore the structure of that anxiety, how it works. The first thing we look for is the external structure of the anxiety, which is in the form of reactive thoughts. All kinds of catastrophic thoughts that tend to feed that anxiety. So we watch for those, and in the same way, we work on developing a mindfulness-based relationship with those thoughts. We see them as objects also, and break the habit of identification with those thoughts and beliefs. We also work with the internal structure of our anxiety. The internal structure is in the form of imagery. That is what I have found through my research over the years, that emotions are structured around internal psychological imagery. It's how you see the emotion in the mind that actually holds that emotion together, and also is responsible for the intensity of the emotion. So people very often feel overwhelmed, which tells you right there that the emotion is very large. Its imagery is very large and very high in their visual field. That is a requirement for that emotion to be overwhelming. And the larger the emotional image is, the more intense the anxiety. So this is the internal structure. Now, when we're meditating on our anxiety, we explore this internal imagery. And then we explore changing that imagery, because that is exactly what happens when an emotion loses intensity and when we heal. When an emotion heals and is no longer a problem for us, it is because it changed its internal imagery, with or without our help. But during meditation, we take the conscious path of helping that imagery change. For example, simply making the emotion many times smaller in size can have a profound effect on the intensity of the anxiety. Moving the anxiety from being a very high position, perhaps at head level, to being at a lower position, for example, placing it on the floor, which you can do in your imagination during the meditation session. You can learn to move the anxiety, and that can have a profound effect on the power of that anxiety. So by interacting with the anxiety and changing its imagery, we can help it heal. And that's a very important set of methods and techniques that I will teach you how to work with the imagery of the emotion. So we do all of this beforehand until we can imagine doing the challenge without any anxiety. And then we do the challenge. During the challenge, we simply stay mindful. That means stay awake, stay aware. And if anxiety appears, we have already trained on how to respond to it skillfully. So we can help resolve it on the spot during the challenge. But then we also do a meditation after the challenge. So we call that a review meditation. And this is very important and very useful because you may have fresh anxiety to work with. And that is always better quality in many ways. So we look at that anxiety that got triggered during the challenge, and in the same way, we neutralize the external structure of reactive thoughts that feed it, and we work on changing the internal imagery of that fresh anxiety until we feel that the anxiety is resolved. And then after a suitable rest period, we would do the challenge again. Do the rehearsal meditation first, then the active challenge, and then a review meditation afterwards, and then some time for processing, and then repeat again. And so this is the systematic approach that I find works best. It makes the best use of that exposure challenge so that you're not just re-traumatizing yourself, but actually training out of the anxiety and fear reactions. So if you would like to get started with me, and you would like to do online psychotherapy for your agoraphobia and panic attacks, and you would like to schedule some Skype therapy sessions, then please go to my website and send me an email. This approach, the mindfulness-based exposure therapy approach, is very efficient, and typically people see progress, tremendous progress, within the first 3 to 4 sessions. It's quite different than conventional talk therapy. It's much more practical, and of course it gives you a set of tools that you can apply yourself between sessions, because that's where the real change happens, as you gain more and more experience of applying mindfulness and with your exposure challenges. So if you'd like to get started with me, please contact me. Thank you.